Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming one of the great TV actors of the 70s and 80s, Jack Stauffer. Jack Stauffer, of course, played Captain Bojay on the original Battlestar Galactica. And he was also on classic shows like All My Children, The Partridge Family, Rockford Files, and he even got to star in a TV movie of the week called Alex and the Doberman Gang, plus many, many others. And I'm having him on the show today to talk about all that stuff and promote his upcoming appearance with the rest of Battlestar Galactica at AllCon in Dallas, Texas, March 14th through the 15th. And it's going to be pretty cool. He's a guy who did strictly TV. He had an uncredited role in a movie called Chattanooga Choo Choo, which I'm going to ask him about too. But he did strictly television, and I want to find out why. And it's going to be pretty cool. So, here is my interview with Jack Stauffer. But this is such a wonderful honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
Oh, listen, this is no honor for me. It's just, never get an old fart actor, talk. I mean, that's, it's like asking a kid not to eat cake.
Yeah. So going back in time, did you gravitate toward acting early on in your childhood?
Absolutely. I mean, this is really funny because this is, what I'm going to relay to you is actually part of the cabaret that I've done for 20 years. It's the opening monologue to it. I was one of those rare people who knew what they wanted to do at age 5. There was something in me that I recognized very early on that I need to be in the spotlight. Hey, world, look at me. As I say, I always wanted to be downstage center. Mm-hmm. And, as a child, I embraced that. And, I had a fantasy world that I lived in. But I think a lot of it was genetic. It was part of my genetic code. My mother was a producer for W.C. Fields. Mm-hmm. My father was an early television producer. So it was always something that I wanted to do, right on early in my childhood. And of course, now we live in a day when kids come out of college and they have no idea, what they want to do or where they want to go. Me, it was easy. I knew from the moment I could, take my first dance class.
Yeah. So did your parents get you into school plays and community theater and all that?
Well, actually, it was different. It was different back then. And, it's really, a strange thing. My father actually did everything he could to discourage me, which led to a really, really estranged relationship between me and my father. But, way back then, there really wasn't community theater and the school plays. In my early childhood, I went, to school in the 50s and the 60s. It really wasn't until, and again, you were segregated back where I grew up in New York and stuff. I mean, I started out in Catholic school, which I really have no memory of, which may or may not be a good thing. But then I went to all-boys grammar schools, all-boys middle schools, and then in the 8th grade, as was the custom in those days, you were shipped off to boarding school, which was a very closed, disciplined environment, and they weren't co-ed schools back then. Laughingly, how I got involved in the school plays and stuff like that was one of the other reasons I learned I wanted to be an actor was it was probably the best way to meet good-looking girls. Which is true. I mean, given the segregated environment I grew up in, as my hormones kicked in my teen years, the beautiful women I'd seen were on stage or in the movies or on television. So when I was in boarding school, I immediately realized that if I was president of the Glee Club, the Drama Club, the Dance Club, the Social Club.
Yeah.
Those were the clubs that had interactions with the girls' schools down the street. So yeah, that's how I ended up, doing, a lot of the school plays and stuff like that in high school. A very funny story was one of the early ones I did. Actually, my parents came and saw and brought with them a very well-known Broadway producer who got dragged to watch me in ninth grade do Our Wilderness. And, my mother told me this years later that afterwards he said, I hate to tell you this, but that kid's got the bug. So, it was always that way for me. And then when I went to college, I made sure that, A, I went to a university that had a top-rate theater program, and B, had women. And at that time, I chose Northwestern, and that's where I went to college. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of musicians go into rock and roll because they think they can get girls.
Well, again, it was you have to kind of understand the times too. This was, we're still dealing with in high school. This is the early '60s, so we were living under a different set of moral codes and social regulations. That didn't change until the very, very late '60s into the '70s. So we were all very uptight in those days, which of course were referred to the last days of Camelot was always the thing, because it was the Kennedy administration and stuff.
Right. You're originally from New York?
Yep. Grew up in the city, and then as always, my parents moved to southern Connecticut. So my father commuted in and out of the city. But one of the things that I had growing up, and again, which reinforced everything, was as an early producer, he was always given tickets to everything.
Yeah.
So I literally, even though he tried to discourage me from going into the business, from age 10 on, I saw everything. I mean, I went to opera, I went to ballet, I went to avant-garde theater, I went to museums, and of course anything that was on Broadway, Shakespeare, drama, comedy, and musical theater. I saw all those because the tickets were available, and so I was very, very lucky to be exposed to it. And musical theater was my love from very, very early on. It's what I gravitated towards, and I can tell you the very first Broadway show I saw was opening night of the original production of My Fair Lady.
Wow. That's a good one.
April of 1956. Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
And yep. So it goes, and I distinctly remember. And then as I went through college, television really didn't mean anything to me. My life's ambition was to be on Broadway. I wanted to be a stage actor. I really didn't care about television and movies. It wasn't until I got out into the professional world that changed.
Yeah. So, did you study with any famous teachers in New York?
Well, again, actually at Northwestern, this was part of the method, and it was the Stanislavski method, and that was the method. Stella Adler was at Northwestern when I was there. So those are the people that you studied under. But I was a different personality. I did not do well in class because the nature of the method which we were taught was to break you down to your most vulnerable level and then rebuild you, sort of like the Marines.
Right.
So a lot of that education was based on harsh criticism and harsh denigration, and not only from your teachers but also from your peers. And I never understood that. I never liked it. I really disapproved of it, and I did not thrive in that environment at all. If somebody told me you suck, you suck, you need to try harder, right? That did not encourage me to try harder.
Yeah.
And that dislike of that stayed with me my whole life. And when I moved over to directing, I made sure I never criticized anybody.
Yeah, same here. I've been told that my whole life too. You suck, this, that. You need to try harder. And I've never listened to them, at least not in recent years, but a long time it stayed with me.
Well, and encouragement and praise and stuff, again, the keys, when I deal with actors, especially, and it's always been with me too, people ask me all the time, what does it take to be a good actor? And I go, the easiest explanation I can give you is it's falling in love for the first time. We all remember our first girlfriend. Mm-hmm. That magical feeling that you've never felt before. And the only way you fall in love is to jump in with both feet. And when you do that and you open up your heart and your soul, and let all your vulnerability come out, you reap the greatest rewards. The downside to it is you also open yourself up to the hardest criticism. And that's the risk that you take. But I've always told, actors, in shows that I've directed is the one thing I promise you, if you leap in with both feet and open yourself up, right, I will never, ever let you look bad. That's my job. I will help you be as good as you can be if you trust me to do that. And, I see it when the show's open, and I look at the faces, especially, directing community theater. These people, spend their lives, 9 to 5 behind a desk. And this is something they've always wanted to do, but maybe at some other point in their life they had priorities, children, family, feeding themselves, and they couldn't do what they wanted to do. They had to make a living. And that's the great thing about community theater is that it allows them to get out and explore these things. And, it is a very sacred place, the theater, and I always wanted it to be a safe haven for my actors. I always got them to do what I wanted them to do. I just always found ways to make them think it was their idea.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to do. I respect you a lot for that.
Well, it's my passion, especially as I'm old in life now. One of my great regrets is that there's very little opportunity for older actors and older directors out there. Because the one thing I believe so totally in is paying forward. Because I was very lucky in going back, and again, you can get me talking for hours here. In my early career, when I got out of college, and got hired to do All My Children, which was how Richard and I met. So he and I go back to 1970 together. The early days of All My Children were basically like doing a Broadway show. We were doing a half-hour drama 5 days a week live. Mm-hmm. So my theater training really, really, really was an asset to me because, we had to learn 40 pages of script and do this thing on 2 rehearsals. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that. But, the story of All My Children was this was the show that was the benchmark and the watershed, which changed all of daytime television. It was the first show that dealt with modern political topics because All My Children premiered in 1970. The world was very much like it is today. Very, very hostile time. Richard Nixon was in the White House, who is probably the only man who comes close in corruption to our current president. But it's, the world was very hostile. We have found out that our government has been lying through their teeth to us about things like Vietnam. The whole moral fiber of the country had changed. We were now into a make love, not war attitude. Completely different, from me. But social consciousness, women's rights, civil rights, abortion, the first elements that time in 1970, the dynamic of the world had changed. We had come out of the, pre-World War II generation, and we were now in the baby boomer generation, which was post-World War II. Mm-hmm. And, in 1970, I turned, 25, mm-hmm. and so we were at the height of our social consciousness. So the biggest segment of the population was now very vocal, very involved, and very opinionated. So all my children took a huge chance on taking 4 unknown actors, mm-hmm. And making them the star of this show, which was incredibly difficult to do. And what made it special, and why I always say it was the happiest time of my life, was, it was Richard Hatch, me, Karen Gorney, who went on to Saturday Night Fever, and of course Susan Lucci, mm-hmm. The number one woman in daytime television. I mean, we were the stars of this show. Now, they surrounded us with the creme de la creme of daytime. Yeah. And these people like Ruth Warwick, Rosemary Prince, Mary Fickett, Ray McDonald, Hugh Franklin, Fra Heflin, Van Heflin's sister. These were veteran daytime actors. And all of a sudden, they were now asked to take a supporting position to 4 kids who'd never worked before. And, it could have gone the other way. These people could have decided to make our lives miserable to show, the network that, they'd made a huge mistake. But they didn't. It was the most nurturing environment I've ever been in. These people taught us. They protected us. They nurtured us. They mentored us. 99% of everything I know I learned on that show from these wonderful daytime actors who let us be the stars of the show and guided us. I said they bailed our asses out so many times. The stories go on forever. But when people ask me who my role models were, these were the people. And, they're all, I think the only one still alive is Ray McDonald, who is now 90. But, I treasure my memory of them. And I was on All My Children for 3.5 years and did 396 shows. And, I loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
But again, it was back in the early days, it was more like theater than it was like television.
Yeah, everyone I've talked to who worked on daytime soap operas tell me just how hard it was because, they don't stop shooting. You got to memorize like 40, 50 pages of dialogue. It's just it's a lot of stress, but it's good training if you want to do on-camera work.
Well, yeah, I mean, and back then, it was different. Now, there's only a couple of soap operas left now. Yeah. And now they shoot them like film. So basically, if you have 2 scenes in the same room, they just do them at the same time. We didn't do that back then. Again, we shot the show from beginning to end. It was a play. So you did have to learn your lines, and you couldn't screw up because the show was called. It was the first invention of videotape. The show was called Live on Tape. So, but basically, we did the show live because All My Children had access to the main frame of videotape at the ABC facility for 40 minutes to do a 30-minute show. Mm-hmm. So you had to get it right. So, I mean, if you screwed up and got into trouble, you had to get yourself out. A lot like being on the stage. If somebody missed a cue or somebody gave you a wrong line, you had to figure out how to get around it.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff put on the air that make for some funny stories that would never happen today. Today they just, each company, the Young and the Restless, and I think Bold and Beautiful, which are still on there. I mean, they have all their own facilities right there. If somebody screws up a line, they just go, oh shit, let's do it again.
Yeah.
Have that luxury. We had to learn it from beginning to end and do it on very short rehearsals.
So they encouraged improv if needed?
No. I mean, because again, they encouraged what's the word I'm looking for here? Not improv, but they encourage you to be free as long as you were consistent. So let's say the script came out and said, you know, the dinner that was scheduled at 8:00.
Yeah.
Well, if I said at the beginning, can I say we're having dinner at 8?
Yeah.
They encouraged that. As long as I was consistent with what I said, because I mean, your first rehearsal when you came in the morning was blocking, and that was mostly, where I go and stand and say what line, where the cameras move. And then you had one quick run through. Then you had a dress rehearsal, which was basically, this is how you're going to do it. Because, again, all the cameras had to move with you. So this was all choreographed. So, no, you couldn't go off into improvisation because the cameras knew, and in the control booth, they were, doing shots and close-ups and stuff according to what they knew you were going to say. So, again, you had to do it pretty much, any changes you made before the air show. And then the air show, you did it. And if you screwed up, I mean,
yeah.
I mean, you really had to get yourself out of trouble. Yeah.
It's crazy. So after All My Children, you began doing a lot of guest star roles on TV. You guest starred on The Partridge Family. Any memories of that?
Yeah, that's boy, I would tell you that award-winning comedy. That was one of my first jobs in California.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I went to California was at the time I married a very well-known actress who wanted to be in California. I did not want to leave All My Children. But that's too long a story. It was funny when my contract expired and we'd gotten married. She was on another world, and we were the darlings of daytime. And All My Children offered us a lot of money to stay, but she wanted to be on the West Coast. And at that time, there was a great separation of what they considered the top of the industry and the lesser part of the industry. So if you wanted to be at the top of the industry or head to the A-list, you had to be on the West Coast. The East Coast was daytime, which was considered secondary then, which was really too bad. I'll never forget one of my early meetings with a very well-known casting director in Los Angeles, who looked at me very snobbily and said, well, tell me what you've done. And I said, 396 episodes of All My Children. And he said, well, that's daytime. What have you really done? And I looked at him right in the eye and I go, if you don't understand that, then you're the stupidest person I ever met. I walked out and I never worked for him.
Oh, man. That's crazy.
Yeah. So, but again, the West Coast, when I went out there, I was definitely the player to be named later in the trade. They really wanted my wife. And, it was one of those things I always hated the highs and lows. The getting a job, and then when the job was over, you went back down to the bottom of the pile, and you wondered where your next job was coming from. One of the great things about being on All My Children was it was 52 weeks a year. It was a steady job. And so, I mean, my break on the West Coast was actually the streets of San Francisco.
Oh.
And that was the first really, really juicy prime time, nighttime drama. And what made it great was, the producer was Quinn Martin, who was one of the biggest TV producers of the time. I mean, he did, The Fugitive, Mission Impossible, Streets of San Francisco, Barnaby Jones, FBI, Most Wanted, Petrocelli. He had a dozen shows. And, if Quinn liked you, he would use you in all his shows.
Right.
So I remember going to San Francisco to do this, and was treated so well and everything. And then when I came back a couple of weeks later, the head of casting for Quinn Martin called me on the phone and said, just wanted you to know, Jack, we've seen the rough cut of your episode, and Quinn loved what you did. So from then on, I did every Quinn Martin show. So, that that was something that gave me a little bit of encouragement going forward.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it was your chance, and what we all lived for in those days was pilot season, because that was your chance to, be hired to be the star or regular on a show that was being considered for like the next season. So, pilot season was huge.
Yeah.
And, I did 5 pilots in my career, and none of them were picked up. And so, again, going back to one of the things when people ask me, how do you maintain success in the industry? I go, that's such a tricky question. And the answer is this, first of all, you need the talent, which is about 5%.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be entrepreneurial, hustle, get yourself in front of people who can hire you, and then make good decisions when they offer you a job. And that's another 5%. And the other 90% of maintaining a career is blind fucking luck.
Yep.
And that's what it is. You have to be incredibly lucky, beyond your wildest imagination, beyond your wildest expectations. We all love to watch the Oscars and the Emmys, and you see Tom Cruise and Meryl Streep and Nicole Kidman and Robert De Niro.
Yep.
They are all very talented people, but they are no more talented than thousands and thousands of actors who ended up selling insurance because they just weren't lucky enough to get that one successful role that put them on the A-list, which got them to the top of the monetary ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And, I laughingly say, I was considered, I was lucky enough to be able to work at what I loved without having to wait on tables.
Mm-hmm.
But I was never lucky enough to get to the major leagues, to that A-list. So I was considered a very good working actor, or as I like to say, a good AAA player. And looking back at it's my greatest regret. That because we all want to get to the top.
Yeah.
I just was not lucky enough to get to the top. And I had some opportunities. I did 5 pilots. They just didn't make it. And and then you get old, and it's always, the industry's very young, and all of a sudden, you're not in vogue anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But when people say, well, can you tell me what you did in your career? And I go, that's easy. 2 series, All My Children and Battlestar Galactica, and then either guest star or appearances, 5 pilots, which I was the star of, and then guest star on over 60 major TV series, movies of the week, or mini series, and about 250 commercials.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the sum of my career. And if you put it all together, it's fairly impressive when you look at it in relation to the amount of people who might have wanted to go into the middle. It's funny because my name is not a household name,
Mm-hmm.
and then somebody will come to me and say, wow, I looked you up on IMDb. I had no idea you did that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is, but it's the way the dice falls. I mean, again, there's stories out there that, the ones that broke my heart. I don't know how long you want to keep this going.
Go ahead, tell me anything, because they want to hear you, not me.
Oh, well, I'll give you a couple of examples. All right.
Okay.
First pilot season, when I was in California. So I auditioned for some pilots in 74 and 5 and didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
76, I got offered my first pilot. And the thing was, I didn't get offered my first pilot. I got offered 2. And I mean, this is the whole thing. You go through, you're standing there going, when's my next job coming? When's my next job coming? Right? And now you get offered 2 things at the same time.
Yeah.
I had to choose. And one of them was from Columbia St. James Television, which was the company that brought us out to California. So I had a great loyalty to these people. And this was a really, really good script. The show was called The Steamers. And it was basically based on this huge semi-trailer, which was a huge mobile surgical suite, which would go to catastrophes, 12-car pilots, burning buildings, bridge collapses and stuff, and be able to do triage surgery right on the spot. And, in the suite were three hot young doctors. There was a cardiologist, an internist, and an orthopedist. And, there were three of us who would start the show, so I played the orthopedist. And in the pilot episode, I literally, in the bottom of this collapsed building, which is flooding, right, I amputate a man's leg underwater. So, I really thought, I really liked this idea. And it was well written. It was great. Okay. So the other pilot that I was offered was, to this day, probably the worst script I've ever read in my life. I didn't understand why they were even going to make this into a TV series. I really couldn't do it. So I really can't say I had to make, a tortured decision, because the show I turned down was this god-awful thing about motorcycle cops on the highways of L.A.
Oh, chips.
Yeah. So as I laughingly say, the Steamers steamed to oblivion. Larry Wilcox took the role that was offered to me and became a multimillionaire.
Oh,
and
man.
for the 8 years that show was on the air, every Christmas, a package would be delivered to my house, and it was a very expensive bottle of wine. And the card said the same thing every year. Merry Christmas, Jack. Thanks again. It was never signed.
I think you made a good decision, though, because I heard Eric Estrada was an egocentric jerk.
I always knew it was from Larry Wilcox.
Yeah.
I always knew that. So this is what I say about, who knew? Who knew? The other pilot that broke my heart was in 80. Again, it was a Columbia show. Fred Silverman was the head of production for NBC nighttime television.
Right.
And he wanted a show with a dog, or not dog. He needed an 8 p.m. Sunday night show for NBC. So he got the rights to the Doberman gang.
Yeah.
And so they were going to do the Doberman. This was the hottest pilot in Southern California. Everybody knew about this show. And because the head of NBC wants it, this show is going to go.
Yeah.
Every freaking actor in the world is after this show. And they were trying to cast it by committee. They had way too many hands in the pie. So I knew the people that were doing it. It was Columbia St. James again. And I called the head of casting, and I said, why am I not getting an audition for this? And he said, Jack, nobody can make a decision. He said, just trust me, I'll get you in the door. So I'll tell you how I got this job. The show was scheduled to begin shooting on Monday. Okay? On Wednesday night, literally 5 days before this major show is supposed to start shooting, my agent calls me and says, okay, go to Columbia tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So I went to 10 o'clock. I went in the room, and I read the scene, and there were five people in the room. Went out in the hall. Al Honorato, head of casting, said, come back in an hour and a half. I came back in an hour and a half, read the scene again. There were 12 people in the room. He said, okay, come back at noon. I came back at noon, read the scene again. There were 15 people in the room. At 2 o'clock, I went over to NBC and did it one more time. Now there's 25 people. And then they made me wait at NBC. They said, we're going to use the set of Johnny Carson to see what it looks like on camera. I did the scene on camera after the Johnny Carson show. I went home. An hour later, my agent called me and says, they've hired you to star in the Doberman Gang. That's how I got that job. Not because I was the best actor or anything. I was the last fucking guy in the door, and they had to make a decision. So they hired me. So now, how much fun was this? I mean, the script was so cute. I mean, it wasn't anything greatly dramatic. night family fare. Mm-hmm. And the star of the show was this kind of inept, goofy, private eye, very James Garner-ish.
Yeah.
He really wasn't very good, and he was always getting outwitted by the bad guys. And his uncle dies, and he inherits 5 Dobermans. Mm-hmm. So now every time he gets a case and he screws it up, and the bad guys are about to get him and kill him, the Dobermans rush in, save the day, solve the crime. That's it. Okay? Mm-hmm. That was the show. It was an hour-and-a-half pilot, so there's 3.5 weeks to shoot it. I had dogs. I loved dogs. I remember on the first day in the set, a trainer coming telling me, "Oh, you have to be very careful about the dogs." And within 3 minutes on the set, I had all 5 Dobermans in my lap. So, the dogs and I were great. The joke was the dogs had the big motorhome and I didn't. But we filmed this thing, and it was just, it was a joy. It was my show. I was the star of it. But this was probably the closest thing to that nurturing environment of all my children, because I knew everybody. This was Columbia Screen. I knew all the people on the set. I knew the grips, the lighting people, the sound people. I knew all these people. I'd worked for them, that company, so many times. So, I had no attitude or anything. And I remember we were almost finished. We were down to the second to the last day of shooting. And Harv Bennett, who was the executive producer, and Harris Cattleman, who was the other executive producer. Harv Bennett is the more important name because he went on to be the executive producer of the first 5 Star Trek movies. But Harv Bennett came down to the set just before lunch and called us all together and said, "Just want you to know that the network has ordered the first of scripts." Now, there it is. Your show's going. It's going. It's going. Right? And it was, I remember thinking, well, I finally got lucky. On a slot machine. I finally got the 3 jackpot. Right? And we were all so excited because we finished shooting this about 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and the show was supposed to start into production the first week of March. So the holidays came and went, and then in January they had what's called the affiliates meeting, which is when they all get together, all these smaller markets, just not L.A. and New York and Chicago, but, Denver and Indianapolis and Omaha, like these smaller markets who have input to what they want, on the air. And I remember Harv calling me on the first night of the affiliates meeting, saying, "Jack, I'm looking at this big white board in front of me, with all the networks and all the slots." And he said, "Right now, out of the 30 slots that are there, there's only 6 of them filled in. But, ABC, 8 o'clock, NBC, 8 o'clock Sunday night, they film. It's already written in the Dobermans." And I was so excited until 4 days later, he called me and said, "I don't quite know how to tell you this except to tell you that a lot of the affiliates in the Bible Belt and in the smaller markets felt that a Doberman dog was threatening. Oh. So they outvoted us." And he said, "I'm sorry to tell you that the show that's going into that slot is Benji."
Oh, boy. Benji.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember Benji?
Oh, I just interviewed the creator, Joe Camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How Benji got in there. And that one broke my heart. That I cried for 2 days because there was, that's the ups and the downs of the business. We were that close to having your own series. And then they put Benji in at the last second. Yep. So, those are 2 pilot stories, that, who knows? You have to be lucky all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's so unfortunate. At least, though, you got to work with a great actor like Jerry Orbach in that pilot.
Oh, he played the villain in that show. Yeah. Yeah, he was wonderful. And a lot of people don't know about Jerry Orbach, that he was a legit stage actor.
Yeah.
He started his career in theater. He was the original Billy Flynn in Chicago.
Yeah. And of course,
I knew Jerry really well. But yeah, I mean, so when stuff like that happens, you just sort of keep going. But that was I tell that story in the cabaret because everybody, all the fans who sit there and listen to me sing, they think that because you were on TV, everything was hunky dory all the time. You made a lot of money. Most of us knew where our next meal was coming from. Yeah.
Wow. And so, how did Battlestar Galactica come into your life?
Well, that's another story. So now, again, I have to back up all the way to All My Children, because Richard and I were very, very good friends, and anytime you have two male actors with egos, there's always the potential for conflict and who's going to get the limelight and stuff. I've always laughed and said, one thing I can say about Richard is that no head was ever higher than the king's. And that was Richard. But when the dynamic of All My Children was, Richard was the tragic heartthrob of that show. He was the romantic lead. I was the best friend. So if you sort of look at it as the Lone Ranger in Tondo, or something like that, that was the dynamic of the show. And I knew very, very early on that Richard was going to be, have his name above the title and above mine. Mine was going to be slightly below it. And if I chose to fight that, there would be tension on the set. And I did not want to have that. So that was one thing. And the other thing that made it interesting was Richard and I were so diametrically opposed as individuals. Richard was this hippie surfer, high school, rebel, dark-haired, absolutely gorgeous kid from Los Angeles, California. And I was this very well-educated, upper society, boarding school, Northwestern University from New York. We were absolutely opposite from each other and our personalities. I mean, Richard didn't know what fork to pick up. So we would literally laugh at each other about this. Richard used to tell me, "Here, come over here. Let me pull that broomstick out of your ass." And I would go over here and go, "Here, can I show you how to button a shirt so you can put a tie on you?" Our friendship, which started on All My Children, endured until the day he died. And because we were never a threat to each other, we always were really just very simpatico and able to cohabit in the same space together without any ego being involved, as long as I sort of stayed one step behind, which I was, I always kind of accepted that. So, going forward now to Battlestar, one of the very few shows that I didn't have to audition for. So,
wow.
The whole story of Battlestar could go on forever. The show, which was the highest rated movie of the week ever, they rushed it into production. They should have waited. I mean, the scripts weren't there. The show was in incredible trouble financially and technically from the day they started to try to make this into a series. And the show floundered because of that. It was up, it was down. ABC didn't know what night to put it on. So the show, and the show was the most expensive thing to do because the set was really unwieldy for, weekly television.
Right.
So the dynamic of the show, as you know, Battlestar is, the fleet fleeing from the Cylons looking for a home planet called Earth.
Right.
And that dynamic was getting stale, and Glenn Larson saw this and decided to make a change. And so he brought in the Pegasus. And the Battlestar Pegasus was the warrior Battlestar, which Roy Bridges, was Commander Kane. And this was to create a whole new dynamic within the show, which could provide conflict within the fleet itself, plot line other than just running from the Cylons every week. And so the Living Legend episodes, these 2 episodes, were written. And of course, on that Pegasus, the 2 hotshot warrior Viper pilots were Ann Lockhart and me. Mm-hmm. So the character Bojay, which I played, was a very alpha male.
Right.
Now, what Glenn did not need on that set, which was so beset with problems, right, both technically, was another alpha male. Because the relationship between Dirk and Richard was always strained because both of them competed for the same dynamic, right?
Yep.
And, I was actually, when I went over to Glenn's office, that fateful day, I didn't go to casting. I went to Glenn's executive office. And I worked for Glenn. I'd done $6 Million Man, and I Kick Bionic Woman. And Glenn looked at me and said, Jack, I know your work. And he said, I know your history with Richard. And this is the character of Bojay. And if you remember the Living Legend stuff, Bojay is the ringleader of the mutiny. So all my scenes with Richard are very antagonistic, because Bojay leads the mutiny. So all of my scenes with Richard had this hostility built into it.
Yeah.
And Glenn, looked at me and said, would I have a problem with you and Richard on the set? And I went, absolutely not. And that's how I got the job, because Glenn knew that I could do these scenes with Richard. Richard and I could do these scenes together and respect each other as actors, but knowing that we would not have an ego problem together, seeing who got all the close-ups. And that's how I ended up on the show. The funny thing about it was, in the original script of The Living Legend, in the raid on Gamorre, Bojay killed. Mm-hmm. And we had finished the first hour, and I got a message from Davey to go to Glenn's office, which terrified me because I thought I was getting fired, which is just like getting called to the manager's office. And so I went up to Glenn, and Glenn looked at me, and I said, what'd I do? He said, it's not what you did. He said, yeah, it is what you did. He says, now I don't know what the hell to do with you. And I looked at him, and he said, I can't kill off this character. He said, it was really such a nice compliment. He said, you bring so much to this show. You bring such a different energy, and you work so well with Richard and everything. He said, I have got to keep Bojay on the show. But if I add you in now for the next 3 episodes, there's only 3 episodes left, he said, I'll have a riot with the women, because the women weren't getting enough to do anyway. Yeah. And if he brought in another alpha male and started writing a lot of scenes for Bojay, there would have been mutiny from the women off the set. And he said, so he looked at me and he said, what am I going to do with you? And I said, well, God damn it, Glenn, I can answer that question because I'm not available. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't. I with the original script, I had already been booked to do a 2-hour police story right after Battlestar Galactica with David Jansen, who was a friend, and made sure I got into that 2-hour episode. And after that, I was booked to do a half-hour sitcom. I wasn't available for the next month. So I said, Glenn, that solves your problem. So Glenn literally said, okay, this is what I'd like to do. We'll work with your schedule. And on your day off, can I write you into one scene from Fire and Space, and then one scene into the last 2, which were the War of the Gods episode? And he said, we'll do them on your days off. And I said, absolutely. And he said, then that will be the end of the season. He said, I don't have to worry about contracts with you now. He said, when we go to the second year, we'll give you a contract with the show, and we'll work all that out for the second year. Would you be interested in that? And I said, absolutely. Let's just do it that way. So that's when we rewrote the second half of Living Legend, so Bojay's Only Wounded. Mm-hmm. And so, and then, of course, everything ended. It was really great. And then we were all waiting to start the second year, and the show was canceled. And nobody even bothered to tell us. We found out when we saw the posted ABC schedule. Mork and Mindy was there. And I said, where's our show? And they didn't even bother to tell us.
Wow.
So yeah, there's just another unlucky thing. It didn't get to the second year. Yeah.
That's terrible. Yeah, I interviewed Ann Lockhart back in January. She's a sweet lady.
Oh, she's been a friend for years. Yeah.
Yeah, Noah Hathaway, I've met him a couple times. He's a great guy.
Yep.
Yep. How was working with Lauren Green?
Again, Lauren Green, I'm going to go back to that same nurturing, professional attitude that was there on All My Children. Lauren Green was part of a generation that knew their craft, worked hard at their craft, and was very proficient at their craft. So, scenes with Lauren, scenes with Lloyd Bridges, who I knew. These people, Lauren and Lloyd, cared more about making you look good than they did themselves. So that kind of takes me back to those early days of All My Children, nurturing. So, but they set an example. In today's world, actors don't prepare. These kids are so entitled.
Yeah.
They show up on the set. They don't know their lines. They don't know anything. They're catered to. They're entitled. I can't even imagine showing up on the set with Lloyd or Lauren there and not knowing my life. It just would never occur to me. So again, you learn from your leaders, and that was Lauren and Lloyd. That's the best way I can describe them. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't watch Lauren Green in anything without thinking of Bonanza.
Yeah, but it's the same. It was the same thing. You set an example to the other actors. If you're the star of the show, right?
Yeah.
Then you set the example, and for others to follow. If Lauren Green showed up every day not knowing his lines, then why would anybody else have? Boy, I tell you, one take. That's all it was.
Yeah. In 1980.
Oh yeah, I have nothing.
Oh, go ahead.
Things to say about them.
Oh, in 1984, you had an uncredited role in a movie Bruce Bilson directed called Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Yeah, there was the name of the guy. I was the newscaster, the news broadcaster. It was credited. It's there. I posted our billing on it.
I guess IMDb just
the newscaster was ever given a name, but I was the announcer for the football team that that show was built around. So yeah, it was fun. I worked with Joe Namath and all these people, and yeah, we shot it in Sacramento.
Oh, I live a couple hours away from Sacramento.
Yeah, yep, we shot it there. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, you worked.
I worked for Bruce many times.
Yeah, you worked with him and his son Danny, who I've interviewed on Viper years later.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just one of those things of, people that you knew, come back and tend to hire you. And that's always the way it's been. And it's funny now, as we go there, people kind of ask me, well, when did you first see a downturn in your career possibilities? And I go, that's really easy. And is when television went from being studio driven to producer driven, and that was in the 80s, when it was no longer Universal Television or Columbia Screen Gems Television or Warner Brothers Television. It was Stephen Bochco Television. It was David Kelly Television. It was Aaron Spelling Television. And the shows transformed from what we called single star driven shows, which had different episodes every week. So there was a lot of guest work available, and they transformed into nighttime soap operas with these huge ensemble casts of Dynasty, The Colbys, Falcon's Crest, St. Elsewhere, which transformed into West Wing, and
Hill Street Blues.
ER. With all these huge ensemble casts.
Yeah.
Now with all of those actors that you have to keep working, using me, they used their friends. But they were a different generation. I did not know these people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't like I could, go through Universal's casting department, where I knew everybody and say, oh, here's a role coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Let me come in and audition. They didn't. Bochco just put somebody in there that he knew. And if you look at all the Bochco shows and all the Kelly shows and all these producer-driven shows, they use the same actors in every show.
Right.
And they always did. So that's kind of when, you began to wonder. And as we got, into the late 80s, I've been around for over 20 years. And, there's just somebody younger. By the time we were into the mid to late 80s, I'd done 5 pilots which had not sold. Mm-hmm. So, if I go back to a baseball analogy, if you've gone 0 for 4 and struck out 4 times, and now you come up with 2 on and 2 out in the bottom of the ninth, you think the manager's going to pinch hit for you?
Nope.
Yeah, he is, because, you can't hit this pitcher. So it's the same thing. You've been around. Your pilots didn't sell. Well, obviously, it's easy to blame the actor, right? So they just find somebody else. Yeah. And that be the nature of the biz. There is no tenure. There is no security. There is no 401k associated with show business.
Yeah.
You just don't know when your next job is coming.
Now, with all the television you did you ever try to break into movies?
The only movie I did was actually Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Right.
And not really because I just didn't know. I mean, back again, at that time, the movies were big studio-driven, star things. The independent films weren't really around then.
Yeah.
And by the time the independent films started up, the same dynamic kind of took hold. These people used their friends. And I'll give you 2 classic examples. The Coen brothers.
Yeah.
Who did Fargo. Well, if you look at all the Coen brothers movies, same paper. Francis McDormand's in all of them.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of the Christopher Guest shows, Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show, all of those. That company is like a little theater repertory company. They use the same actors in all the 6 movies that they did. So I just really never had the opportunity. My career was on a different path. Maybe if I'd known Clint Eastwood, he could have put me in something, but I didn't know those people.
Yeah. And also, too, back in those days, if you were a TV star, the only movies you would get in were either movies of the week or exploitation films. You couldn't get in the big films unless you were James Gardner or Tom Selleck or Michael J. Fox.
Right. And Garner was one of the few actors that could make that crossover.
Yeah.
I knew James Garner very, very well. He could make that crossover. Most people couldn't. I'll go back to a wonderful dinner that Susan Lucci came out to California, and this is probably 1986 or something. Mm-hmm. And she'd been on All My Children for 15 years and playing Erica Kane, and she had dinner, and she came to me and she said, I don't know what to do. Do I leave the show? I want to do other things. And she asked my opinion, and I said, Susan, the one thing that you have is leverage, because they can't do All My Children without you. And, she said, should I just take the money? And I said, no, they'll give you the money. This was when she was offered $1 million a year for the first time. I said, take the money and have them put in your contract that you get to do 2 movies of the week, and you get script approval every year. Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and go, I didn't think of that. She went back, that's the deal that she made. Now, what was really funny was, if you look at the films, and these are actually movies of the week, mm-hmm. that Susan Lucci did, they were all the Erica Kane characters. They were the same character. Mafia Princess, Mafia Bride, you know, Mean Girl, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, even though she did films, you know, she was pigeonholed into that Erica Kane character. And of course, her famous thing was she had to be nominated 14 times for an Emmy before they gave her.
Which she always made fun of, by the way. She went on Saturday Night Live.
She did in the public light.
Yeah.
She made light of it, but it hurt her very, very deeply.
Yeah, I can imagine. 14 times.
Yep. Yep.
So
yeah, again, you know, you just never know what's going to catapult you. I mean, you know, what with the Joaquin Phoenix, you know, who did. Oh, all right. So I will tell you, here's the classic example: being in the right place at the right time and getting a role. It's Sam Rockwell.
Oh yeah.
But 4 years ago, he couldn't get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And then he does Mississippi Bridges Burning with, you know, Francis, and he's brilliant.
Yeah.
And he gets this small movie, wins the Oscar, and now he's one of the hottest actors in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a bad actor before that. He just wasn't lucky enough yet. But then his ship came in, and good for him. Good for him. I think he's a terrific actor. I thought, you know, when he did Fosse Burden, I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, he's a very talented actor.
Yep, good actor. So, you know, again, like I say, 90% of it is blind luck.
Mm-hmm. So what are you doing these days?
Hoping somebody hires me. I mean, again, I left Hollywood after Richards and my attempt to get Battlestar redone.
What year was that?
That'll kind of give you a good tag to this whole interview.
Yeah, what year was that?
That was 98. Richard and I hadn't seen each other in a while. Richard never lost his love for this show or for Glenn's vision of the show. Richard always thought this show should have kept going. Mm-hmm. And in 1998, Richard came to me and said, for years he had tried to go to networks and people that he knew and stuff to say, we really ought to try to bring this show back. It has so much potential. But, you know, television never really liked sci-fi, you know, that much. Anyway, Richard said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a trailer. We don't have any rights to the show, but he said, I would like to make, you know, a 15-minute trailer to show what this show could do if we took, you know, the original premises, took it out 20 years further. Mm-hmm. Lost what? 4%? Okay. All right. That was my last shot at me. So, you know, Richard wrote this great script about the show 20 years down the line, using the original cast now as the Lorne Green parts and bringing in the whole younger cast, but moving the show forward.
Yeah.
And Richard sunk every dime that he had into doing it. We had no rights to shows, and Richard asked me, you know, because I've been friends with him for a long time, he said, Jack, would you be in it? And of course I said, well, what are you paying me? And he said, absolutely nothing. So I said, of course I'm in. So, I mean, we did this. So many of the background actors and the one-line parts were done by fans who had costumes, you know, because they were Battlestar fans and they made their own costumes. So many of those people were in it. Richard and I, you know, we made this trailer. Richard took it to the studios. He took it to Universal. He took it to Glenn. Nobody wanted anything to do with it. So we took it out onto the Sci-Fi Con circuit. And we crisscrossed the nation showing this thing. And 5 people wrote in, and 10 people wrote in, and then 100 people wrote, then 1,000, then 10,000, then hundreds of thousands of people wrote in and said, we want to see this come back. And that's why Battlestar Galactica was remade, you know, in the 2000s. But instead of doing what the fans wanted, and instead of entrusting it to two actors, they handed it to Ron Moore, who simply remade the original and changed the sex of people. And that's why there was the big brouhaha, between the old show and the new show when the new show first premiered. But enough time had gone by that the new show developed its own audience.
Yeah.
So it was very successful. It saved the Sci-Fi Network. Ron Moore promised me 3 years in a row he would write me into a couple of episodes. He lied through his teeth. He never did. He was smart enough to put Richard in the 4 or 5 episodes as Tom Jarrett. But the only reason that show was ever remade was because of what Richard did. And then at that point, I pretty much knew my career was over. I mean, I had pretty much moved away from television and gone back into theater in the 90s anyway. Mm-hmm. And an opportunity arose for me up in Monterey, where I live now, to run a theater and be its resident director.
Love Monterey.
And California, yep. And so I took it. And I loved it. I mean, this was my paying it forward, and we were great until, the big crash of 2008, which wiped us all out, wiped the theater out, wiped out everything, my savings and everything. So, I mean, up here, again, I'm out of the mainstream. There is no more studio-driven industry anymore. We watch the world evolve from network television to cable television to internet and now to universal net.
Yep.
There is so much availability out there for people making products. And so now so much of what you see, there's so much opportunity for young people to do things. And now you're seeing the big stars, who are normally the big stars, now that they take their producers. So, you have to be friends with these people. I mean, Amazon's going to own the world and own the entertainment industry, but left over that Disney doesn't have. Again, at 75, there are not a lot of roles out there that are, made for 75-year-olds. And also, you have to realize that now this will get a little political. Well, back, when we were viable and there was NBC and CBS and ABC, right. We were protected by the Screen Actors Guild. Mm-hmm. And that was our union, and they ensured we got decent wages and health care and stuff like that. And then when the industry evolved quickly into cable and then has exploded into this internet world, our unions have not kept up, right? So now, it doesn't do you any good, really, if you're a member of the Screen Actors Guild. There's so many actors out there. There's so many people making products, right, that, this goes back to there are a lot of good actors, who never made it. Mm-hmm. Well, there are still a lot of good actors out there, but I'm still bound by my membership in the Screen Actors Guild. I just can't go out and do this film for somebody because I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the percentage of, internet filming and internet TV is, but I would say it's probably 70% non-union. Mm-hmm. And also, too, that it's worldwide now with technology the way it is. And, you look at something like 1917 and how they filmed it, cameras are the size of your phone. You don't need to shoot interiors in a sound stage in L.A. Yeah. You can shoot it in somebody's house. So basically the industry has moved to wherever will give them the cheapest rate. I think probably the biggest production area right now is Atlanta. Certainly isn't Hollywood.
Yeah, everyone's shooting up in Georgia now, which is kind of bizarre, I think.
Well, because they're getting great tax breaks and they're getting away with not using unions and stuff like that. Again, the world has always been run by the rich. Yeah. And the entertainment industry is no different. So, the rich get richer, because they don't have to pay the actors as much, and they get big tax breaks from filming in places like North Carolina, and they don't have to use Teamsters and stuff like enjoyed that. So, everything is completely different than it was when, Richard and I were viable. And Richard, bless his heart, he tried to stay alive.
Yeah.
Richard made some really bad early internet movies for no money, for literally no money. He went broke. When he died, Richard, was living in a friend's guest room.
I didn't know that.
And he was so committed to keeping going. Since I moved here, I've done 2 short films. Both of them went to international film festivals and won awards. The second one I did was called Sons of Guns, and was this quirky thing about this old former Nazi who literally Frankenstein creates because he gets DNA off Hitler's personal Luger, which he finds, and he recreates Hitler. And I played this mad German scientist, and I did it, in a German accent, speaking in German half the time.
Yeah.
And it won Best Short Comedy at the Santa Monica International Film Festival. I was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but did not win. But
that's good though, at least.
I did that movie, and the reason I did it was my oldest son had a friend who had written a script and said, God, I really need a 70-year-old guy to play. And my oldest son said, I know somebody. So I did that. And then, my theater up here, I've done a lot of directing of theater up here, but, again, theater's a dying thing now. It costs so much to do stuff, to produce stuff and to mount productions. And there's a perception of what people will pay to go see a live production of something. We hear about Hamilton, that's fun, but in smaller communities, people think, I don't want to pay more than $25 to go to that show. And they don't realize that, if we fill the seats every night at $25, we get half our investment back.
Yeah.
So, it really is a losing money proposition. I will tell you, I did get my last major stage appearance was in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
I got to do Death of a Salesman, and I got nominated for a Drama Critics Award, but did not win. And that was the last. And then last year, again, I got hired to do a brand new musical called David Copperfield, based on the Dickens character. And this was an idea that they workshopped. And I got hired, and I played 5 roles in it. And it was great fun, but they didn't. It wasn't successful enough to raise enough money to keep it going.
Yeah.
So it died. But old actors are like the old. Are not like the old General MacArthur. We don't gradually fade away. We're still hoping there's one more thing out there. And so I'm available.
That's good that you're still out there, at least doing that, and that you're following your dream after all these years. At least that's what counts more than anything.
Oh yeah. Well, it's been my passion and the driving force of my life, like I said, since I was 5. And look how long this interview went on now.
Yeah.
As we laugh and we say, I told you to never get an old actor talking.
I love talking to older actors more than young ones, trust me. So March 14th through the 15th, you'll be at Allcon in Dallas, Texas, with many other cast members of Battlestar Galactica. Have you been doing conventions a long time?
Yeah, and mostly those are gone now, and we're very concerned about Allcon. So this coronavirus, as of now, we're still there, but I would say don't put that out there that we're definitely going to be there because it is very risky now when the CDC is telling us not to go into crowds and get on crowded airplanes. Doing cons, the one thing that the fans want, and again, I'm old school about this. These people love you. These people watching you is the only reason you had a job.
Yeah.
So when they come up to you, they want to take their picture with you. They want to shake your hand. They want you to put your arms around their shoulders. And I have to say, we're not doing that. We're trying to keep separation. So I am not sure that I'm going to go to this.
Okay.
I may back out. Simply to protect myself from catching this disease, which nobody knows enough about.
Yeah. Well, that's
so I would not, if you don't mind, maybe leave that part out, because as much as I don't want to say yes or no at this point, who knows if the planes will even be flying to Dallas next week.
Okay. Well, if you guys ever do come to California for a convention, I'll definitely be there.
Well, again, the world has moved on past this. I mean, the fun thing about All-Con in Dallas was they had all of us surviving members of the cast in one place at one time. And I think this was going to be the last convention. It was probably going to be mine. There is just, we're an old generation. Time has passed us by. The people who go to cons want to see their current, heroes.
Yeah.
And Battlestar was kind of newer. We were kind of fun to be around. But, now we're just a bunch of old actors. And, I mean, if you can get the entire cast of Game of Thrones, or here's the classic example, all the original Lost in Space actors. Well, nobody wants to see them. They want to see the new ones.
Oh, I'm going to meet the old ones in a couple of months.
Yeah. So, again, there's very little demand for the old actors out there now. Like I said, this was supposed to be my last one, and I don't think I'm going to anymore. And I understand it. I mean, a promoter, has to look at, okay, I want Jack to come. This is what it costs me for his plane fare and his hotel room, and to feed him and to guarantee him a certain amount of income. And, okay, so how many people are going to walk through the door to see Jack Stauffer? And when you really look at it that way, the answer is not very many.
Mm-hmm.
So we bring the actor of the new show, who 10,000 people will go through the door to see.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the reality of the industry. There was a time, when you were viable, and then you get old and discarded, which is kind of the way of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jack, I thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, and I hope nothing but the best for you.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm glad I got to swap some stories with you. Like I say, it's fun. You get an old actor talking. If you need me for anything, you know how to reach out and get a hold of me.
Oh, that would be great. And, if you do end up doing a convention again in California, I will be there, like I said, and I'll let you know.
Oh. All right. Well, we'll be there. I'll show you pictures of when I had hair.
Okay. You have yourself a great day, sir.
You too, and thanks for letting me be on the show.
My pleasure. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Jack Stauffer. Ain't he a cool dude? Wow. That is he had just some amazing stories about the television industry. I mean, I've heard stories about both television and movies, but wow, that heavily in-depth about TV, that's just incredible. It's a tough business, but I hope the convention happens, and I hope he gets booked in California. He comes to his senses and gets booked in California once more. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.